Silkworm was playing this weird theater in Hamilton. And I went down there to the show, and it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe how great it was. And I still remember it. And just sitting there going, oh, I'm in the wrong place. I'm doing the wrong thing with my life. Like, I can't not be here if they can. And they already had a bass player.
Welcome to the Over Under podcast, where we talk to musicians, builders, and a variety of industry folks to discuss their stories, insight, and experience surrounding the music business. Hey everyone, thanks for watching another episode of the Over Under podcast. I'm your host, Hank Donovan, and today I am super excited to have Tim Midyett of so much cool bands that I'm so excited to talk about, ranging from, Einheit, Bottomless Pit, Mint Mile, Crust Brothers. I know I'm forgetting Deep Tunnel Project, Sun, and of course Silkworm.
Right on.
How's it going, Tim?
It's going good. Thanks for the hype.
Yeah, did I miss like 5 other bands or?
No. I haven't really been in that many bands, but it's mounting, they add up.
Nice.
Yeah, maybe a couple very early ones we don't have to talk about. Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll get into those.
I had a band called Children of Habit with Andy and Ben Kuster from Einheit, which was probably the best band name of any band. But we just played covers and we never played a show or anything. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to really start off by, when Steve Albini passed away, I wrote a post a long time ago at that time that said Rattlesnake cables wouldn't even exist without Steve. And that was really nothing to do with him particularly in the impact of cables, but it was the fact of, in my world, and going to high school and junior high and living in Montana all my life, there was always this sort of imposter syndrome that I experienced where everything was cooler somewhere else. Skateboarders are better. There's no one that does bands. No one does anything until I found out Steve was from here.
Yeah.
And I was way into Big Black and I had no idea. And when those two worlds collided, it blew my mind. But I wanted to say Silkworm was the same thing for me.
Yeah.
And
awesome.
Yeah. When I moved away, when I graduated high school, 89, a friend of mine was telling me about Silkworm that he moved here and was telling me about that band. And I was like, wow, it's crazy. And then to see that band evolve over the years from Seattle to Chicago, I just always was like, wow, it's totally possible to make something cool. And I just wanted to make sure that you knew that before going any further. But
yeah, thanks a lot. That makes me feel good.
Yeah, there you go. So part of the Over Under podcast, I like to kind of go deep into the stuff that's like what started. I don't really like to go in like what made you play guitar or bass, but I'd really love to know what was the vibe in Missoula, the mid 80s, early 80s, when you're trying to like form a band. There's not a lot of people here at this time, not a lot of weirdos, not a lot of original music.
Right.
How hard was it to find people like Andy and Ben and Joel and talk about like those early days?
Well, I think it was easier to do that in, 83, probably when we started playing music, than it was, 5 years before that. I mean, certainly there wasn't much of a recognition of punk rock or whatever contemporaneously with like the Sex Pistols and all that stuff. But it's not to say there was zero. And I remember vividly when I was a kid seeing a guy and his girlfriend, and they had like super ratted out hair and black leather jackets on, and the guy's jackets had Heartbreakers on the back, and it wasn't Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. It was New York Heartbreakers, and which I didn't know till much later, but it was that lettering, the red lettering from the album cover and stuff. I was like, whoa, what's up with those guys? So I remember that. I remember seeing a picture of Bowie in like People magazine. And this was much earlier than that. I was just a little kid. And it was probably like Ziggy Stardust or something, maybe a little bit after that. But I was like, what's up with that dude, And so there was like stuff would kind of leak in, but there wasn't, I would say there wasn't a lot of punk. Well, there's never a lot, but there wasn't much punk rock or weird music until probably the very late 80s or like 1980 when Who Killed Society and Ernst and bands like that sort of started kind of doing stuff around town. And the first thing I ever saw was Einheit, probably in '83, and I didn't know what to make of it. I'd never heard Public Image Limited or anything. They played Theme by PIL, which I only know because later when I heard it, I'm like, oh, I heard them play that. But it was a slog because you know what it's like to be in a band in Missoula. Like, it's not the easiest thing in the universe, but at least you had Jay's upstairs and a couple other places to play at Union Hall or whatever. But we would have to rent something, the Moose Lodge, or we rented Loyola High School's gym one time, which is expensive. I think we broke even on that show, barely. Valley Dance Studio. There used to be this dance studio downtown above the sushi place, where that is now. So you had to rent the place. You had to rent a PA. You had to set everything up yourself. You had to advertise the whole thing yourself. It was the max DIY, but we didn't think of it as like an aesthetic. It was just what you had to do to play a show. You know what I mean? So, and then if you were lucky, people would show up and you'd make, a tiny amount of money, or you just get to play in front of people, and that would be fun, So yeah, it was interesting. You could do whatever you wanted, though, was the cool thing about it. Like the Einheit shows were, a lot of times they were 3 sets. We'd play for 2.5 hours, which had to be a lot for people to take in.
It's a lot of Einheit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was like multiple versions of Einheit. So when you said you saw Einheit, that was Tom Kipp and then other people involved into it.
Yeah, Tom Kipp and John Kappas. John Kappas was the founder of the band. Tom Kipp was a founding member of the band. Was Joel Phelps a founding member of Einheit? Yeah, he was. Would have been '83. So there's a band called Ernst before that. That was Sean Swagerty, who Sean was like one of the proto independent type music weirdos in the city. Like, him and John were two of the like post-punk guys. They started that, basically, whole thing. There were punk bands, but there weren't bands like that were making this weird spidery kind of cryptic music. So out of Ernst came Einheit. That was John Kappas, Tom Kipp. This guy, Brad Walseth, played bass, good bass player. And who played drums in the first version? I can't remember. The version I saw would have been Brad Bernier playing drums. Dan Bauer, who's a really great punk rock bass player. He could play super, super fast downstrokes, which I could never do. So I was always kind of jealous of him, his ability to do that. And then Joel and John and Tom. So it was all of them doing their thing. But at a certain point, Dan decided he didn't want to be a Einheit anymore for whatever reason. And Brad fell off. And they needed a rhythm section at bare minimum. So they had to dive all the way down to the like 15-year-olds in town. And that's where me and Ben came in. Yeah. And Andy. Andy was 14. Yeah.
So I was going to say, these guys are all older than you.
Yeah. Right. John Kappas just died last year. Unfortunately, got to see him right before he died, which was good, but super terrible thing. But he was 64. So, and I'm 50. I was 56 or 50. Yeah, I was about to turn 56. I think I was 55. So John was 9 years older than me,
Yeah. So in the 20s while you were 15.
Yeah. But those guys, they had no choice. They had to put up with this in our juvenilia, because they needed someone to play bass and drums and stuff. But yeah.
So then Einheit continued on. So I didn't know Joel. I mean, he would have been pretty young when he was a founding member too, right?
Joel was in high school when he started in the band in '83. And then he was the guy musically in that band. I mean, he's the guy we looked to. And Joel's how I learned how to write songs. And Andy's the same way. He's like, me and Andy bounced off each other a lot, but we learned from Joel, and John, watching them do stuff and the way they would put things together and not think so much about playing certain things as what they were hearing. You know what I mean? So they're very musical people. John couldn't play anything, no instruments, but he would sing stuff. He'd sing you the bass line and then you play it. And he really liked super repetitive stuff. So I had to learn how to lock in as a bass player, not deviate too much, which if you play bass is like rule number one to lay it down. I think should be. So yeah, that's where we cut our teeth, and it was a great band. Really live. The weak spots were the things that I wrote, because I was a child and I was just aping whatever, Husker Du or whatever. Probably mostly Husker Du, and not doing it very well, But then I heard stuff Joel did then and in the early days of Silkworm, and I realized he wasn't thinking about anything when he wrote that stuff. And he taught me how to do that, how to just let it go.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, I know you and Andy and Ben went to Hellgate, but did Joel go to Hellgate or was he Sentinel?
No, he had the misfortune of going to Sentinel, which was like rougher on people who were are weirdos, he would get like, people would hit him in the head and stuff. I think he got in fights, whereas I've never been in a fight in my life. And Hellgate was just like university kids and, no one gave a shit. My class in particular was purported to be the worst athletic class in the history of Missoula County high schools because we were all soccer players and potheads, we didn't care about football at all. Like I think I could barely field a football team. So it was a much easier environment for us than it was for Joel. Yeah.
And you guys just all hung out in the same place. I mean, how'd you end up meeting Joel? How do you hang out with these 20-year-olds? How does
that's
this
a good
work?
question because it's a little sketch. And looking back on it, I think my dad must have been like, he's hanging out over at this guy's apartment and who knows what's going on over there. But, and truthfully, it was fairly tame for them. I mean, it was Missoula. So of course we were drinking and stuff sometimes, but, anyway, Joel, we just knew Joel from music. And he was like this, Sean Swagger, he was kind of this mysterious like figure in the mist for Joel. And then Joel sort of got to know him a little bit, but was still kind of freaked out by him. And we felt that way about Joel. He was like this like freakish musician and super intense, singer and stuff. And John, strangely, even though he was older, was a little bit more approachable. And Tom was, able to relate to us pretty directly. So I'd say it wasn't really until the Silkworm that Joel and me and Andy became super close. I mean, we were friendly in Einheit, but, he was kind of off on his own wavelength and, had girls around him all the time and stuff like that. So.
Now, at this time, I mean, what kind of stuff were you listening to? Like, what was the stuff that was shaping your musical brain?
Well, when I was a kid, I just listened to whatever was on the radio, right? Because there was the college radio was like 1 hour, 2 hours a week of somewhat weird, mostly kind of bad taste, like Euro new wave stuff that wasn't actually that great. But I shouldn't have said that because I can't remember whose radio shows. But I didn't listen to the shows that much. I'm sure they were great most of the time. But, we grew up listening to hard rock and stuff on the radio because the one good radio station was KZOQ and it was more rock and less talk. And you would hear just whatever on there. I loved ABBA. I loved Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, all that stuff. And then I think by the time I'd gone through the Police and Journey, fortunately, I had graduated from that school, whatever it is, and then ended up getting into English Beat and then Psychedelic Furs, who I still love and think are awesome. I still love the English Beat too, but those were kind of my gateway bands, those two bands. And then I remember when we joined Einheit, Tom Kipp made me a bunch of tapes, and one of them was Metal Box. which, is one of the greatest records ever made. And it's kind of a comp of stuff from first issue and other PIL stuff. Todd told me about Gang of Four. He told me about, I remember first time I ever went to his house, actually, he played Husker Du for me. The A Mouse High single and part of Metal Circus. And I was like, whoa, that was like, what the hell? This is incredible, So a lot of that did come from Tom. He sort of schooled us or set us off on this path. But I also worked at Rudy's, Rock and Rudy's.
Oh, that'll help too, yeah.
So yeah, I heard all kinds of stuff there. I remember hearing the first Velvet Underground record vividly. That changed. That was the whole deal for me when I heard that. I knew where I belonged after I heard that record. But yeah, you know how it is. It's catchers catch can in a college town with no radio. College students, and they have records and they sell them sometimes. So.
Well, I was really hoping you'd say something like that about Tom Kipp, because when I grew up, I would remember running across, what I'd call elders. They were, 20-something-year-olds, college dropouts maybe, but they're just on their own. But then they would, that was, remember the first time I saw a Husker Du album and just getting schooled on what's this, what's that. But
yeah.
But yeah, I could relate with that big time.
And John was very, he liked a lot of stuff, but compared to us, because we were kind of omnivores, he was very focused. He was a post-punk aesthete. He loved, Joy Division, New Order. I also, top flight groups. But he loved the sound, Comset Angels, Susie and the Banshees, all that kind of stuff. So, what's that band, Section 25? Is that what they're called? Section 24. What are they called? Right. I can't remember all my factory bands off the top of my head. But, he really loved Doriti Column. He loved all that stuff. So he helped steep us in that. Chameleons, bands like that. So that was his milieu. That's what he was really into. Yeah.
So how did Einheit morph into Silkworm?
Well, Einheit,
what changed that?
Einheit, for us, I know it was founded in 83. Me and Andy and Ben joined as children in 85. Did our, bachelor's degree in how to be in a rock band with John as kind of the professor and Tom as the voluble TA who did a lot of the work. John led by example more. And then Joel was like the star pupil, right? So, or he came up with a lot of that stuff on his own. So he led by example too. But anyway, in 87, people were graduating from college and John was getting done with college finally after years of goofing around. And he was moving to Connecticut. So it was clearly over. And I went off to Northwestern. And then Joel told Andy he was going to start this band. Joel went off to Bozeman for a few months. Had a band out there called Ambient Driver with Joe Howard, who was later Joe Skyward and Sky Christ Mary. But anyway, he came back and he's like, "Hey, I'm going to start this band. Do you want to play in it?" And Andy was like, "Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. I can't believe Joel Phillips has asked me to play in his new band." And then Joel kept sending me tapes and kind of, prodding me very gently about things. And then I went back for Christmas break. I was only at Northwestern for a year in Evanston, Illinois, outside of Chicago. And Silkworm was playing this weird theater in Hamilton. And I went down there to the show and it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe how great it was. And I still remember it. And just sitting there going, "Oh, I'm in the wrong place. I'm doing the wrong thing with my life. Like, I can't not be here if they can." And they already had a bass player. My friend Dave Rose was playing bass. And I was like, I bet if I come back, I can get in there somehow. So Andy was going off to school and it was going to be me playing guitar maybe. And then Dave just kind of, he kind of took over this Dave Weckerman, a guy in the Feelies who plays percussion type role. And then he just sort of phased out of the band. And it was me, Joel, Andy, and Ben Kustra. Yeah. So that's how that happened. It was Joel. Joel's the guy who started the band, It's his baby. Yep.
So what led to the move to Seattle?
Well, we got offered a show in Chicago by a guy that I knew in Evanston when I went to school there, and I'm sure it would have been kind of disastrous for us to go out there and do it, but we kind of pushed to do it. And Ben liked playing the drums, and liked playing in the band, and incredible drummer, a great musician, can do anything. And but he didn't want to do that. And I think he realized then, oh, these guys are actually going to try to do something with this piece of shit band. I don't think he thought real. That, but we were gonna do things that he didn't want to do. So he very reasonably was like, I'm out. And then we got a drum machine and goofed around with that until we finally, ended up realizing we had to get out of Missoula if we really wanted to play more than once every 2 months or whatever. And we talked Andy into leaving Columbia University in New York, where he was going to school. So he bailed, and then we just moved to Seattle. And then we met Michael pretty quickly, which was massively great. That the one great thing that came out of living in Seattle was that, meeting Mikey for sure.
Did you guys all move into like a house together?
Yeah, we did.
You like got apartments? Okay.
I don't know how long we would have lasted as a band if we'd all sit in the house. But it was a typical kind of like scene where it was not that big of a house, and my then girlfriend, now wife Vicky, and I had the one good bedroom, and then Joel and Andy had kind of shit ass bedrooms upstairs, and Michael didn't live there. He was on his own. See, he already lived in Seattle. And then we just kind of, we bailed at the right time. That lasted about 6 months, because we were already around each other all the time. And it was better when we had a little bit of space. Yeah.
Cool. So now I already forgot the name of that album. Lajra.
Yeah, well, that's how I say it. Some people said it Lodger, like the Bowie album. I don't know why.
So that album was the first, I guess, real album you guys recorded. I know you did some demos and earlier stuff, like probably in Missoula, right?
Yeah, we had 2 tapes. We had one tape in Missoula. The first tape we made at KUFM on their 8-track machine, which is a good machine. I probably don't have it anymore. But that was called Advantage, and there's some awesome Joel songs on there, including stuff that never showed up later. My songs on there are dumb, but Joel's were pretty great, and they sounded weird but cool, and it got reviewed in the Rocket. I remember Scott McCoy reviewed it in the Rocket. He only reviewed stuff he liked, so he said some nice stuff about it, how it just sounded cool and the songs were good and stuff. And then we recorded another tape called Girl Harbor that we pared down to 5 songs because the other ones that we recorded didn't turn out so great. But the first album was Lajra. And we had some singles by then and stuff, but yeah. And it was a bit of a chore to record because we were used to things sounding a certain way in the room, and trying to get that translated to tape isn't particularly easy when it's a real big sound, and we worked with a good engineer, Stuart Hollerman at Avast Studios, great guy. But, we weren't a normal band. We didn't feel like a normal band in terms of the way we sounded. So, but we did some live stuff that sounded pretty good. And then that was self-financed with a loan from some friends, and eventually sold them all. So that was good.
Yeah, success. So I remember back in those days, Seattle pre-grunge was the destination. Everyone in Kalispell wanted to go to Seattle. It's where you went to go see shows. Portland wasn't really ever mentioned that much at all at that time. It was just Seattle was the place. And I'd always wondered, because I've known some other bands to move to Seattle in the late 80s, very, very early 90s. And then grunge blows up.
Yeah.
And those bands, including your band, is not grunge. And how do you cope with being in the, one of the largest music scenes in the world in a genre that you don't quite fit into, and everyone expects it to be that way?
The funny thing about Portland, just to sidetrack for a second, is that there were more cool bands in Portland. Like the fucking Wipers are from Portland. Like Dead Moon's from Portland. Dead Moon was the best band in the Northwest the whole time we lived there. Like any of those sub pop bands, like Dead Moon killed them. So it's funny that there are these like absolutely deathless bands in Portland. But Portland was just kind of this weird, dark, alcoholic harbor town. It felt weird there. And Seattle was hopping, But when we moved there, it seemed like it had reached critical mass, band-wise. And we were kind of like, well, there's a lot of places to play so we can get some shows, but there's a lot of fucking bands here. And then a year after we moved there, the Pearl Jam and Nirvana records came out. It was like, just completely overrun by hordes of ding-dongs, and very low batting average. There were a few bands that we loved. We loved Tree People and Jessamine and Engine Kid. This band Citizens Utilities was good. These bands that were a little weird like us. Walkabouts. I always liked the Walkabouts a lot. And some of the sub pop stuff. I like Mudhoney. Fluid were a great live band. They were from Denver, but it was completely overrun. And we were thrilled when we started touring because we got out of town. We played places where people weren't just trying to make it 24/7, flog their shit. They were just making music, and we played in San Francisco, and you're like, oh, this is where it's at. And we played in Chicago, and you're like, oh, this is where it's at. People are just doing it as a byproduct of being alive, So yeah, it was really crazy. And unfortunate, I feel lucky that we missed a lot of it by being gone.
Gotcha. There was a time, and I almost didn't want to tell this story, but I'm going to tell it because I think because I respect you and the band and the time. So I think we'll have a good laugh. But right. I remember going to Seattle. I think it was to see Smashing Pumpkins. I can't remember what the situation was. Mm-hmm. And I get the rocket. So I only know the name Silkworm. I knew that there was a band at some point because the friend who sent that couple songs from back in the day was talking all about Silkworm. That had been 1990, 89 maybe, but probably 90. And looking through the rocket, and there was Silkworm, and it was a review. It was a bad review. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God.
Which one was it? Because I read it. There was one bad one that was good, that was well written, and one bad one that we just made us laugh. Was it the first album?
It's going to be, yeah. It's going to be. Okay. So I was like, this morning, I was like, I wonder if I can find that review. And I'm like, I couldn't believe the rocket's all digitized. Right? Yeah. Yeah. And I found it.
Great.
Right? So I'm going to just read just a small excerpt of it.
Oh, read the whole thing.
But then I couldn't believe it. I dug a little further and I saw a reply. You actually responded to the review.
I did, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
The only time in my life I ever did that, probably.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let me have it.
The review is too many REM-isms, too many college rockisms, too many isms to understand this miss. Fairly, they seem to know what they are doing.
All right.
The instruments at least sound in tune. Silkworm are going to need to spend a lot of time in Seattle trying to figure out what teen spirit actually smells like before they can let go of their Yoko Ono on glueism.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's the nicest thing anyone ever said about us. Did you sound like Yoko Ono on glue? That's incredible. I wish.
So you responded on the next issue. You said, quite pleased with the Jeff Gilbert's impassioned review of our new CD. Anyone thinking Soundgarden, the ultimate in modern musical expression, had better pan us by God. One question, would Yoko Ono on glue fronting REM be a fair distillation of his blurb? Gotta shoehorn it into the press kit, Tim M. Loved it. Made me laugh so hard this morning. I was like, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was great. Yeah. I couldn't believe I found it because I literally read that and I was like, oh man, I haven't heard you guys since that one little mixtape recording of one song.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, here's that Silkworm, that band from Montana. And then it's like I read it, I'm like, oh man. Man, they must not be good, you know?
Yeah.
And just a few years later, I'm like obsessed with the band. So it's hilarious, and I'm glad that worked out just the way that it did. It's perfect review.
Could have used more reviews like that. Yeah. That's pretty entertaining. By all accounts, Jeff is a very nice guy. But, he's a metalhead. He had a metal show on the I think so. Yeah.
I just feel like it'd just be really hard to be. I was wondering about being on tour, if that was a relief. To get out of that zone.
It was. I don't know. I'm stereotyped. I don't think the bands that just kind of came up and did whatever they felt like doing. Like, I keep coming back to Mudhoney. That just seems like a band, a bunch of guys who just played together and they were pals and they wanted to rock. So they were good. But I felt like there was a lot of aspiration there, commercial aspiration, but also to be like some concept of what the band was like, which wasn't something we ever had any time for. We never thought, once we got to our second record in the West, there was no more genre thing going. I wasn't trying to like write like anyone else, or I was just doing it. And sure, there are influences in there, no doubt, but you're just letting it flow. And I didn't feel like that happened a lot there. Whereas in the Midwest, I felt like it happened quite a bit. A lot of the Chicago bands are, even the really economical kind of bands like, Big Black or Breaking Circus or Killdozer or whatever. There's no band like Killdozer came out of the Seattle scene. Come on. They were better than everybody who played in that town, I think, and they were just doing, I don't know if they ever thought twice about what they were doing. They just came up with an idea and they did it, So
in the West was the first album Steve got involved in, right?
Well, he recorded an EP before that called His Absence is a Blessing. That was a 5-song EP. And that was the first thing we ever did with him. We did that in a day. And that's when we heard that and we're like, okay, well, we have to come back when we have a record ready, a whole record with the songs, because this is basically what it should sound like, And we went back and did it in the West with him then too, and then we were off to the races, Just everything was with him from that point on, yeah.
So how did that relationship start? Like what? Did you guys know each other at all in Missoula in passing, or?
We met a number of times. We had kind of a lot of little meet cute things. It's a lot of stories. I guess the first time we met was in '86. A bunch of us drove out to Seattle to see Big Black, their next to last show in Seattle, not the Georgetown Steam Plant show that got videotaped. The one before that. And I met him very briefly at Fallout Records. Strangely, they were doing an in-store, which seems weird in retrospect. But they were there and not that happy to be there and whatever. I said hi to him. That's about it. Told him I was from Hellgate. He's like, and then that was it, And then in '87, I was at Northwestern, right? At the radio station. And Steve went to Northwestern. And he came in with a copy of the first Rape Man single and dropped it off. And I was playing something off Warehouse Songs and Stories. And I was on the air. And he just looked over at the label and grunted and then turned around. And then the first Rape Man show was on April Fool's Day. I've told this story a bunch of times. In Clark Johnson's basement in Evanston. Clark was the bass player for Squirrelbait. But anyway, it was in the basement, and a bunch of us were crammed down there. The people in the know, only knew about through the radio station. And I was under orders to tell him that from our German teacher at Hellgate High School to say hi to him when I ran into him. She really liked him. He was not beloved in high school because he was such a dork. But she's like, say hi to Steve Albini. So I go up to the front and I say, hey, Roz Hudgens says hi. And he just froze. Like I was going to give him a swirly or stuff him in a locker or something. And he was like, Roz Hudgens, that's my German teacher. And I was like, yeah. And then he turns around and he turns back to me with an aerosol can in his hand and sprays me in the face with fart spray as this April Fool gag, you know. Then that summer, he came into Rockin' Rudy's and said, and I recognized him. I asked him if he's doing anything musically, and he got all freaked out and left. Such a weirdo. And then he came back the next day and he goes, "Are you Tim Midyett?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I just realized I've been incredibly rude to you twice. Once at Clark Johnson's house when I sprayed you in the face with fart spray, and once yesterday when I just walked out the door and didn't say goodbye." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, you know, that's cool." So later we were on the air at NUR years later, and we were talking about Montana, and there was a call, and the DJ, who I think was John Solomon, who puts out our records now, handed me the phone, and this person's asking me about all these authors from Montana, if I know who Dorothy Johnson is, or Ivan Doig, or Richard Hugo. I'm like, yeah, I know who all these people are, and I could tell it was him, you know. So I was like, what's your name? And he goes, "My name?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Steve." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're Steve Albini. You know, we met at the Rockin' Rudy's." "Oh, yeah. So that's kind of what started us thinking we could record with him. Like he was interested enough to call the radio station when we were on the air, pulled over to do it, you know, from a payphone. So we were like, okay, well, let's do something and see what happens. Yeah. So that's how we met. That's a long story. You can edit that.
No, that's solid gold. So so at this point, it's an interesting perspective, because I would assume there's no kind of a starstruck or intimidated in the studio situation, or was there still a little bit of a small, you know, kids in the band with the, you know?
No, I don't think so, really, because we grew up. The interesting thing is, like, we grew up in the same environment, sort of. Like, you know, you have to make your own fun. And if you like stuff that's weird, you're going to be seen as being weird. And he was definitely seen as being a stone cold weirdo, you know, and was in high school, you know, irascible and just difficult and freakish, you know, whereas we weren't really like that. But, you know, as far as our music was concerned, it wasn't any better regarded than Just Ducky probably was, his band in Missoula. And we didn't, and also we'd been in Seattle for years by that point, you know, and we'd had to eat a lot of shit and have people like Jeff Gilbert tell us we were terrible. Needed to listen to the Sonics more or whatever. So, you know, we didn't give a shit. Like, and we came up through Einheit. That was our training ground. And Einheit was like, "Fuck you. Don't care. We're going to do this. And if you yell at us, we're going to yell at you," you know? And so that was a much more confrontational kind of environment than Silkworm was. But we didn't care. We were really inward looking. And he picked up on that, I think. And so he would say stuff off the cuff to us, and sometimes we would listen, and sometimes we wouldn't. I found out my bass didn't sound the way I wanted it to when I recorded with him, because he didn't run it direct like everybody else did, you know? So I'm like, "Why does my bass sound like there's no middle to it?" He's like, "It's your fucking amp. Your amp sucks." I was like, "Well, what kind of amp should I get? Should I get an SVT?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." You know, I was playing through like a Trace Elliott something. And I got an SVT and I was like, "Oh, fuck, this rules," you know? And then when we recorded in the West, he's like, "What's up with that potato bass? You're really in love with that potato." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "It's shaped like a potato." I'm like, "No, it's not. It's just a bass." It was a Spectre thing. And I'm like, "Well, what kind of bass should I get? If you talk me into getting an SVT, so what should I get for it?" And he's like, "Well, there's this company called Travis Bean, and they make these guitars, blah blah blah." And so I got a Travis Bean, and I was like, "Oh shit, he was right," you know. So we listened to him for stuff like that, but we didn't listen to him sometimes with his ideas on arrangements or what order to put the songs in on a record or stuff like that. But once he got comfortable with us, he would do that. He would just tell us what he thought at the top of his head, and it was always appreciated, even if we didn't listen to him particularly. Yeah. But I think that's why he liked us initially, was that we weren't fazed by him doing anything. He could say anything around us, and we weren't gonna wasn't going to bother us. You know what I mean?
Now, you guys were what I would call definitely road dogs for sure. The amount of times you guys were touring, and if I remember right, if I have my facts right, you guys had taxi jobs when you're not on tour. Was that the gig that you had?
I realized the other day, I think I started driving a taxi before I'd ever ridden in a taxi. And because in Montana there weren't any. But Michael was the cab driver. Like, he was a full-time cab driver when we met him. And he used to like get a station wagon cab. We'd have a show in Vancouver, and he would get a station wagon cab for $50, and we'd pile all our shit into it and cram in there and drive up and play. And then, we'd take 2 cars usually. But so he's the one who was doing it and told us, well, it's easy to make money, blah, blah, blah. And then me and Andy started doing it. I think, Joel did do it for a little while. Yeah. Not very long, though. Andy and I did it for several years. Yeah. Yeah, that's how and if you're touring, that's kind of great, because you come home from tour, you can just the next day go to the lot and start working to make your rent. But we were road dogs. We toured 6 months a year for a couple of years, I think. And
you have any particular crazy tour story? Good, bad?
Well, there's kind of a lot of them. There's one really great show that we saw that I think of a lot, where we were playing in West Virginia in Huntington. Can't remember. I think the place was called Gumby's. And there was this dude who was booking the place, and we showed up, and our friends and Engine Kid were already there. I think they had played there before, but they were doing shots with this guy because he loved him so much, or liked him. And then he's like, hey, give Michael and Andy shots, because they were drinking or whatever. The guy's like, no. Well, okay, fine. And we found out later somehow that this guy managed this band that we'd been playing with in Cleveland the night Kurt Cobain went missing. And there was that going on, but then plus we have friends in Cleveland, so we were out front. We didn't watch them play. There were like 100 people in there watching them, so I don't know why they gave a shit that we weren't in there. But anyway, this guy had a grudge against us. So, and he'd evidently told everybody in Huntington, West Virginia, that we were persona non grata, So we got up there and we played, and we stopped, and there was dead silence and just people with their arms folded looking at us. And we did another song, same thing happened. So then we just mushed all of our songs together into like 40 minutes of noise until we were done. And then the Engine Kid guys came up to us and said, hey, can we use your amps? They're really drunk, so they're talking loud. They weren't usually drunk at all, but they were that night. We're like, sure. We thought they didn't want to bother setting up their stuff, but instead they set up everything. And Greg played through 2 half stacks. So he had his 2 half stacks, Andy's half stack, and Joel's half stack. He's playing through all of them. And Crafty, the bass player, had like 4 15s and, an SVT and whatever he played through. And it was super sloppy for them. They were usually really tight and really, really radically loud and great, And at one point, this guy Harley threw a bottle off the wall, and it bounced off the wall and hit Crafty in the head while he's playing the basses. So it was, and after every song, Greg would go up to the mic, they'd get done, and he'd go up to the mic and go, fuck you. And then they'd start the next song. It was really great. So I think about that show disproportionately often compared to, most of them I can't even remember,
Yeah. I'm sure they blur into each other.
Yeah. For sure.
I know during this time that Joel leaves the band and you become 3-piece for an epic amount of time.
Yeah.
And how was that transition? I mean, was that obviously on a personal level that had been very difficult, but also just on a business level, just like trying to perform, or what are you doing? I know you guys all had different singing roles and different songs, and you can morph that, but
yeah. It was incredibly emotionally difficult, because I've always loved Joel and love his playing, and he was great musically right up till the very end. We never like had a public thing where we started to suck or didn't give a shit or whatever. So the shows were always great up until our last show that we played in San Francisco together. And, but he just, at the time you're like, oh, he's going nuts. You know, we don't want to deal with this guy anymore. And he doesn't want to deal with us. We were touring so much for, $0. Never knew where you're going to sleep or anything. You couldn't make any plans at all for anything. And it's totally reasonable to not want to do that anymore. You know, we were kind of the insane ones looking back at it. But he had reached his wit's end with the whole thing. And we didn't want to ease up. So that was it. The realization of that was very gutting for me. But pretty quickly we rebounded and we're like, okay, we're going to be a power trio. We're going to kick ass. It's going to be fine. And we started practicing as a trio, and it opened up the sound. I played a little more. Andy played more. And Michael, by that point, was, a master drummer. So he took up half of the sound on his own. And musically, it was shockingly easy. We couldn't play Joel's songs anymore, which sucked because they were great, but there's no way we play it without him. And most of the time for his parts, we just left him out. There was just silence. If there was something that he would normally do, some part of the song, we would just have nothing. It would just be drums and vocals or whatever. So
yeah, and the idea too, where you guys started moving on and then actually moving to Chicago, piecemeal.
Yeah,
which is also this band always blows me away of what would kill a normal band. It always is something that you struggle with, but it somehow keeps you guys still going. So yeah. It's like, Andy goes to Chicago, you guys are still recording, you guys are still playing, and then eventually you move next, correct?
Yeah.
Or do you and Michael move at the same time?
We moved next. Michael was pretty soon thereafter, I think. But we were really, by that point, it was more of like a family relationship, So we were like brothers, and we did this thing together that we loved doing. We had a little bit of traction by that point. We'd been on Matador, and then we were fortunate enough to just be able to hop over to Touch and Go after that. So pretty lucky. But after years of not being that lucky, and we never even sold that many records, but these guys liked what we did, so we were able to do that. But it was just we didn't want to not do it anymore, and we didn't want to not be around each other. That was really the main thing, is that we wanted to hang out together and all be in the same place. And we love Chicago. That was it was hardest for Michael because he grew up in Seattle area and he had more of an attachment to it than we did, for sure. But Andy loved it there, and I loved going there, and we loved Steve and Heather, and had loads of friends. All the Dianoga guys lived here, and the people from Lounge Acts lived here, so it was a very, very easy transition to make, and super easy decision to make to move there.
Yeah, it seems like a perfect fit in so many different ways.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, totally. Yep.
And of course that always has to lead to Michael being killed in that crazy situation, which was basically the end of Silkworm.
Yeah, he died on July 14th, 2005. Shit, it's going to be 20 years.
Jeez.
In July. He was just blown out in a car wreck. The lady crashed into his car on purpose, killed him and two other guys who were a lot like him, similarly gregarious and good musicians and stuff. But yeah, we didn't even talk about it. I think I said in the paper the band was over. Someone interviewed me and asked me about the band. I'm like, oh, it's finished. I didn't even talk to Andy. And 2 days later, I was like, hey, I just realized I said the band was over without talking to you, but I'm assuming. He's like, oh God, of course. Yeah, he's like, how, it was like inconceivable at that point that we would keep doing it. So yeah, that was devastating. And it took years to get over that. Like, it took me 9 years, seriously, to get all the way back where I felt like that's something that happened, was terrible. I lost someone I loved. Not to be, and that's life, but not to be, not to undersell it. Like literally that's life, you know, you have to deal with that kind of thing. So, we had to grow up, I think, pretty quick when that happened. So yeah, that blew out the band. And you lose not only your dear pal, your brother, but your identity. 'Cause our identity was being the Worm, you know, a big part of it. At least inside of us, that's how we thought of ourselves as part of this collective, you know. So yeah.
So when Steve passed away, yeah, we watched it here in the shop, the memorial, and I could not believe that Silkworm was going to perform at this memorial.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal. And, you know, I know Heather is a big fan and all of that. And it's amazing to see, you know, shortly after the Silkworm Instagram popping up, the slightly modified star. And I'm like, what is going on?
Right. Yeah. It was the only, none of us had thought about it. Well, I don't know about Joel, but probably not Joel. And definitely me and Andy are like, never occurred to me to try to do it again. And, Steve died, big whole weekend thing with a bunch of music. Heather asked if I wanted to play and maybe do something with Andy. I said, yes. And I was like, hey, I called him. I'm like, maybe we should play with Jeff Panel, who plays in my band, and do some Silkworm stuff. And he's like, yeah. And then we found out Joel was going to fucking be there. And we're like, oh, okay. Well, and I asked him and he's like, yeah, let's do it. So if we're ever going to do it, you know, at a memorial for Steve would be the place to do it. So we did it and it sounded awesome to me, you know, like we played in the basement and the instant those guys started playing together, I was like, oh, that's it. You know, that's the sound. I hadn't heard that really for 30 years, you know? So, Jeff worked very hard to, get the songs under his hands. He's an awesome drummer, but a much different style of drummer than Michael was. So he had to adapt to do that. And he did a great job. And then we were like, I wonder if we do we want to do this again, you know? And we set our goal, at least I set a little goal of getting into Gonerfest because I thought that would be a good place to play because it's a great festival. And we got a good offer there. Booked a show in Chicago, sold out in an hour, booked another one, sold out in 8 hours. And the third one is slowly ticking up. It's a bigger place. And I think we've maybe gotten most of the fans, the easy gets already. But so we're doing 3 shows here and a show on the way down in Tolono, Illinois, and then Gonerfest in Memphis. Yeah. So far it sounds good.
I'm sure it sounds real good.
Yeah, it's getting there.
I mean, when you guys were over here, it didn't even register the idea of Joel playing on the 3-piece songs.
Yeah.
And just thinking like, wow, these are like new songs, but old songs. It changes the whole vibe. It's incredible.
Yeah. I was
so excited to hear those. It
was really fun to do that. And I think that's really, well, I know for me and Andy, that's kind of what lit the fire under us. We're like, this is an alternate universe version of the band. And not having Michael in it is not a plus at all. But Jeff is a very good drummer and he's lending his own thing to it. He's a great drummer, and there are a couple things that are better than there are on the records because Jeff's a more accomplished drummer than Michael was when he recorded them. But and then hearing Joel do his stuff, like he plays the weirdest shit and it just fits in, like it's this weird glue thing. And for both me and Andy, we're like, that's the money part of this. I think is him, you know, and hearing him sing and just lending his voice to it. And he'd already done that on a couple records for my band, Mint Mile. He played saxophone at my behest and just, you know, stunning, awesome shit. Because he's a great musician. So, yeah, getting to play with him again is really a gift, you know, because it wasn't a given that would ever happen for sure.
So are there recording dates?
No. No, we don't have any plans to record anything. it is a hassle, because Joel's like way over here in Vancouver, BC, and Andy's over here outside of Boston, and then me and Jeff are equally inconveniently located in Chicago. So it's expensive and it's a hassle. Those guys are coming middle of July soon, a couple weeks, and we'll play for 3 days. And we did that this spring, and then in September we'll practice for a few days before the shows. We've got a couple hours of stuff, so there's no shortage of music to play, and I think it's all going to make the cut probably.
So
Not that we'll play it all at every show.
Is there anything new? There's been new ideas.
New, other than just Joel transforming some stuff by doing his whatever he does. Like, I don't know. I'll ask that guy, what chord are you playing there? And he'll be like, oh, I think it's I don't know what it is. And you're like, that's like an augmented flat 7. I don't know what that fucking thing is. But it sounds great. And the rest of us are just like, G, But yeah, there's no plans to do anything like that. Joel keeps saying he doesn't have any songs, and then he sent me a song, So I think he's sort of playing possum a little bit there. But yeah, I mean, never say never. I guess I never thought this would happen ever.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we'll have to see how it goes.
That's so awesome. I'm excited. I mean, just let it do its thing and see what happens. But
exactly, yeah. As long as we enjoy it and can hold up at our advancing ages, under in the van, not get all like kinked up or whatever, sitting in that Sprinter for 6 or 7 hours. Yeah, we'll do this stuff and see how it goes, and then just kind of take it from there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we're knocking on the door for an hour, and I wanted to see if we could hit in an hour, and I think we did it.
Right on.
I think we should wrap it up, but man, I'm so glad that you agreed to do the show.
Yeah,
I've always enjoyed our talks, and I'm always excited with what's going on with you, and I really appreciate you being on the show.
Yeah, you bet, man. Thanks for having me.
Cool. All right. Talk to you soon.